We have two complementary presentations, and it's good that we can also look not only at the Philippine experience and recommendations, but also from particularly Bangladeshi experience as a labor-sending country. Now we have two ladies. Actually, it's interesting. We have two males making the presentations, but we have two ladies giving their comments. So we start with my colleague from the Department of Political Science, Dr. G. Encinas-Franco.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you so much, Dr. Atienza and Dr. Carlos, for inviting me to this very important forum. And at the outset, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Tigno and Dr. Khondker for their very interesting discussions and arguments. I'm sure all of us were very much enlightened with their presentations. So let me add a few so that later we could have a very exciting open forum. At first, I couldn't agree more with Dr. Tigno when he said that there really is ambiguity and ad hocness in the way the Philippines is managing migration. To this day, the Philippine government continues to deny its reliance on labor out migration as an economic strategy, despite the consistent, factor of remittances in our GDP, which is averages about 10% of our GDP. And about 25% of our labor force, the World Bank says, is actually out of the country. The recent growth of 6.6%, which is being touted by the Philippine government, is actually a welcome news. But however, if you look deeply into the statistics, much of the 6.6% growth come from remittances and the services sector, which is again propelled by the consumption of remittance-dependent families. So to this day, we are still very much reliant on overseas employment as a factor of growth in our economies. But overseas employment really has a lot of contradictions. So the state really has to skillfully manage it. And I think Dr. Tigno was right in saying that the victimization discourse has a lot to do with the fact that the government is always defensive when it comes to migration, such that because of this, the welfare-oriented approach is very much prominent in the policy discourse in the way the government is managing migration. Because of this welfare-oriented approach, the government is always assumes the role of a protector. Policies are always on the protective stance, which sometimes does not actually lead into better outcomes, specifically for migrants and their families. For instance, when we ban the employment of certain sectors in some fields, it doesn't always yield to good outcomes because it deprives many men and women of their livelihoods. And I think it's also about time that we call on the lack of data, specifically on returnees. If you look at data, it's really the case that POEA only accounts for, that's the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, only accounts for the contract, meaning the job orders. So they just account for the work that the migrant is going to do overseas, not the migrant's educational qualifications, such that if a migrant is a nurse living as a caregiver in the UAE, for instance, or in other countries, what is accounted for in our records is that a caregiver has left the country, not a nurse. So it has a lot of implications in terms of the reintegration that Dr. Khondker and Dr. Tigno were also saying a while ago. If you want to reintegrate, how will you reintegrate if you do not have data on the profile of Filipinos living abroad? Another thing is when you lack data on returnees, and specifically if there are a lot of migrants who are de-skilled, it really further disadvantages women because in migration literature, most of the people, most migrants who are the skilled are actually women because they are actually found in the informal economies of migrant receiving countries, such as in households or in in the entertainment sector. Turfing is also a very potent issue in terms of migration management, and I think the best example would be when the Middle East North African crisis came about. A study by the Scalabrini Migration Center already stated that the Department of Foreign Affairs has somehow failed in its reading of the MENA crisis precisely because the Philippines spent so much money in trying to repatriate in its attempt. Again, this is, I argue that this is again an attempt of the Philippine government to downplay the contradictions of labor export because when they went there, they even hired luxury because they couldn't find any ship, but then only to find out that very few migrants actually want to come home. Because again, this is turfing issue. The Department of Foreign Affairs would be in charge with repatriating migrants, even undocumented ones, under the repatriation of Filipino nationals approach. But then, what about the reading of the labor market situation? When the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi actually tripled the salaries of government workers, most of the nurses in Libya are actually in the public sector. So nurses wouldn't want to leave because of their oath. That's the way they were socialized, you know, when they were in school, and also because its salary is tripled. So most nurses opted to stay in Libya. So if you compute probably there's going to be a study that computes the resources. I think this is also the case in the absentee voting, no? The resources expended by the Philippine government in trying to repatriate. I'm not saying that the government should not repatriate, but then I think it is something that they have to settle, and I think it has something to do with better coordination and to resolve the turfing issue because migration and repatriation issues are very complex processes. It's something that cannot be resolved by just defining, oh, this is just my function, and then this is because in repatriation, labor market conditions, the political crisis must also have to be understood interconnectedly. What else? With regard to Dr. Khondker's, presentation, indeed, I congratulate you for still thinking that there could still be harmony in the interest of migrant sending and migrant receiving countries. Indeed, there are some good indications. As you said, the Abu Dhabi process, the Colombo process, and also the GFMD, the Global Forum on Migration and Development. Although they are still non-binding fora for discussion, I think this is a good start, and I am happy that also the Abu Dhabi process, which started as a forum for discussion for migrant sending countries, also evolved into a process where migrant sending and migrant receiving countries could talk about certain issues. There are a lot of things why harmonization is also difficult, and not just because of the different economies, level of economies of migrant sending and migrant receiving countries. I think there are also other factors, such as, for instance, racial selectivity. We saw in the statistics that Dr. Khondker presented, for instance, that in the UAE they seem to privilege workers from India, from Pakistan, and India. So these are countries that are from South Asia. Other differences would also, for instance, be on labor market conditions. Some migrant receiving countries would also want to protect certain occupational categories in their own countries because, as you said, it's a very political issue. So they must also guard against political repercussions in this country. A lot of economists are saying, for instance, that in the MENA crisis, one factor that brought about the MENA crisis would be about the fact that most of their economies are on a youth bulge. A lot of young people do not have jobs. So I don't know what migrant sending countries are going to do about it, because it might actually result in some countries from the MENA crisis, little by little resolving this youth bulge, and it might result in them, slowly strategizing such that in the future they would actually have employment for the young people. It might lead into a decrease in the migration volume from some that they get from migrant sending countries such as the Philippines, for instance. Another factor, for instance, in the different, that's why harmonization is difficult, would be on gender ideologies. I think this is something that has been extensively discussed by a political economist, which specializes also in migration, Nana Uwishi. She said that gender ideologies also is a factor. For instance, some migrant receiving countries would want to encourage their women to work in the labor force, such that they would prefer foreign women to take on the reproductive roles that these women are supposed to be doing. And other migrant sending countries would, on the other hand, want to protect their women such that they wouldn't encourage women to get out or to migrate. So these are factors that would really be part of the interests of both migrant sending and migrant receiving states. That's why harmonization is still a work in progress. Another thing that Dr. Khondker discussed was on human rights discourse. Indeed, when you talk about human rights discourse, it doesn't always yield to good outcomes, primarily because it may sometimes not result in genuine empowerment. Because it leads to a top-down approach, because you want so much to protect these migrants. It's the government that actually thinks for the migrants instead of first understanding the lived experiences of these migrants. So I think that the operative term is to really understand the complexities of migration. And I'm very happy that Dr. Khondker is also, again, your research is very interdisciplinary, because I think that's what migration research is all about. It cannot be boxed into just one discipline. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.